Kasia, I like the colour of your top too.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Thank you for joining us for our first virtual event of 2024. So Happy New Year to you all. You're in for a real treat today with today's annual virtual discussion with these fabulous panelists. I'll leave the introductions to our moderator and CTAM Europe board member, Kasia Jablonska, although I'm sure you probably already know them from industry events and from this virtual annual meetup they do for us. We're scheduled for 45 minutes, which includes time for questions. So please post your questions by using the Q&A button. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, please email info@ctameurope.com for details. Members have access to an industry webinar a month, webinars and podcasts from our colleagues across the pond at CTAM US, and also you would be invited to apply for the week-long Executive Management Programme at INSEAD. This is live in person at INSEAD in March, and I'll follow up over the next couple of days with more details. You need to act quickly though, as there's only 5 seats remaining. Our panelists also have access to the registration list and may follow up with their own news separately. So I'll take myself off screen now. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll hand you over to Kasia and the panel. Thank you.
You're mute. I was actually on mute. So again, hello and welcome to our biannual panel on the hottest trends and pressing issues in ever-evolving landscape of the media industry. So I'm very excited to moderate today's conversation. As you saw, I'm so excited I forgot to switch the microphone on. The media industry keeps undergoing rapid transformation, fueled by tech developments, shift in consumer behavior, and ever-shifting tectonic plates of the market. We have gathered a panel of first-rate media experts and thought leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge to shed some light on those changes. On the panel today, we have from my left, Maria Rue Aguete, Senior Research Director at Omdia, Nathalie Lethbridge, founder of Atonic Digital, and Jonathan Broughton, Head of Strategy at European Broadcast Union. So let's now dive into our overarching theme of navigating the media maze of trends and innovations. Let's start with a big picture, and Maria can sort of lead us there and explain what do you see as key media trends in 2024?
Thank you, Kasia, and Happy New Year, everyone. I think to start with trends, I love always to put some data behind some slides. So let me start with this slide, if you can all see it, where it says that the media and entertainment industry will hit $1 trillion this year, 2024. This is a very big number. And most of that, more than 70% of that will come from video, what we call traditional TV, linear TV, pay TV platforms, and online video is growing the fastest of all, 367 billion. Followed by games. So a big theme again for 2024 will be gaming and the crossover of IP across video, gaming, and also aggregation partnerships of telcos with both video and game players, followed by music and cinema. But I would like to highlight as well that a lot of this growth will come from advertising. So of all the online video revenues, 62% will come from advertising, 43% of traditional TV revenues from advertising, and even in games, advertising is huge. So there is a lot of potential for collaboration for those advertisers to cross-collaborate across all these different platforms. The future is hybrid, more clear than ever. So we don't see many pure SVOD players remaining going forward. All the big players will all have advertising in 2024 and going forward. They all need extra sources of revenues. Another big theme we'll discuss today will be shoppable TV, retail media, commerce media. But I want to say that Amazon will be the one leading that wave of new shoppable TV. Amazon will be in better place than anyone else to show those revenues coming from advertising. And with other themes I see from 2024 will be connected TV, the importance of connected TV revenues, connected car. It was at CES discussed by many car manufacturers and media companies, the prospects of the connected car. And content, in the content side, we know Netflix published those 18,000 titles. At Omdia, we look at every single title, language, country of origin, genre, and I can tell you that non-English content will become big theme in this year, especially Spanish content #1, followed by Korean and Japanese content. So these are big themes: advertising, shoppable TV, non-English content, the connected car, and content discoverability. Those are my main themes for 2024.
Thank you very much, Maria. And Natalie, I mean, sort of leading from those trends, one of those things I'm extremely interested in is the content e-commerce, especially in the light of Disney recently unveiling its streaming shoppable ad formats. What do you think is the future of content e-commerce? Is it an untapped opportunity, potential market disruptor?
Well, McKinsey's and others have done reports on this in the last sort of 8 months to 10 months, and it's forecast to grow faster than social in terms of revenue opportunity. Why? Partly because it covers several touch points in the ecosystem. It covers obviously social commerce, and we've seen TikTok's foray into that, very successful, and Instagram's. It covers retail media, which is forecast to swallow up in the US alone 50% of ad revenue in the next 3 years. And certainly here in Europe and in the UK, 25% of ad revenue. So big areas of growth. And beyond that, also within the CTV environment and within other environments with streaming, we can see once the UX is properly fully executed so that you can actually deliver technology that delivers monetization or transaction opportunities at the point of inspiration without taking the audience out of the content ecosystem, you're going to see a lot of shoppable moments. It's the natural evolution from, I guess, what used to be called affiliates. It's a different form, but it's you can expect to see partnerships develop. You can expect to see brands starting to lean into content as they are able to sell through that content. So you've already got the a gleaning of that through Walmart and its financing of certain shows at the end of last year in the Christmas period. I think you're going to really start to see the impact of branded content also financed through these shoppable moments. So I think there are lots. It's a very exciting opportunity. It's a high growth opportunity. It's very early days. The tech has come there. The UX is there, though. I have to tell you, going back to the Disney announcement recently, I was quite surprised that they are touting this with a QR code, because for me, QR codes are not it's a second screen QR code. This has already happened. There's nothing new there. It is an interrupted experience through the QR code on the phone, but it shows the willingness to carve out part of what would have been traditional ad inventory for more of transactional opportunities. And by the way, you are correct, Maria, in saying that Amazon is a major player in that. Amazon very quietly launched Amazon Anywhere last year. I think it was in was it May, June last year? And it enables people to purchase with Amazon as the fulfillment provider on any site outside of the Amazon site and ecosystem. So it's really taking Amazon's retail footprint completely outside of its own closed shopping environment. That's going to have huge impact. And we've already seen that it started to announce that it wants to introduce advertising, and I suspect also content commerce into transactable moments into its fast and freebie TV. That's a natural evolution for it. And obviously with the data that it has, the expertise that it has, the ability to deliver and act both as retailer and as fulfillment provider, it makes it a very huge contender in this space. And to be honest, it's going head to head with TikTok on that as well. So lots of exciting stuff there.
In fact, Natalie, Amazon, we are predicting this year the revenues they will get from advertising, of the new advertising they're launching, and all retail media will overtake all the advertising revenues of Netflix. I mean, we are expecting more than $2 billion that Amazon will get this year, because they're starting at a point that Netflix didn't have. They already have a lot of expertise in advertising. They are going to put everyone in that ad tier. So if you don't want adverts, you will have to pay extra. So they are following a very different strategy from Netflix.
Correct. And when I've spoken to them last year, certainly twice, once at IBC and then again during New York Ad Week, there was a very clear strategy there to focus on advertising in various formats, not just in its traditional formats. And they're very much perched into that and being a very big monetization tool outside of just the retail monetization.
How much of this is actually outside on US? Because that is probably
well, the US is obviously driving it, and as I understand, they're planning to launch in Europe in end of January, early February, and then in Asia, or even in Asia in earlier than that. I imagine the markets they're likely to hit, those where they do well. They'll probably hit Japan as well, because they want to go head to head with the Japanese incumbents. They need to make a mark there. That's one of the toughest markets for them, because obviously they have very strong local incumbents who might not, who give them a run for their money. But in Europe, it feels like it's inevitable that it will launch in the next couple of months.
Yes.
We're going to see a lot of movement in this space. We're going to see a lot of competition. I think if you talk to ad agencies, they're all very focused on retail media. I think content commerce will evolve from there when they, you can't just have it as a walled garden within the retail environment. Clearly, social has to be taken into context. And we go back to one thing that I think is becoming increasingly obvious now as we move to a more sophisticated environment. And I know that Kasia, you have some questions on gaming, but in all of this, you have to go where the consumer is, and the consumer is not in one place. So, and this is again where CTV has a role to play, because it does aggregate all of those destinations. But that's why you have to look at models and business models and test them across all mediums where the consumer is, whether it's social, whether it's gaming, whether it's online publishers, or whether it's TV.
Yep. Completely agree with this. I mean, it is becoming a hybrid world in many ways, and it's really difficult to stick to one way of monetizing your content or looking at sort of business models. We all kind of have to adjust to be able to do at scale across and kind of experiment with different models. But maybe if we kind of can go back to one of the other trends, which you mentioned, localized content, or I would say even if we take a step back in general, if we can look at the basically the kind of economics of the content supply chain. And Jonathan, I know you had quite a lot of thoughts about it. So if we look especially what's been happening in the US, because obviously even though it all sounds really exciting, sounds like advertising revenues is coming back to the market, it doesn't look like all is well in the streaming paradise. There were a lot of sort of tectonic plates shifting over last year, especially in the US, among the US studios. So would be good to have your thoughts on this, Jonathan. What's happening with this content supply chain, and where do you think we're going to end? And sorry, just before, like if we could genuinely encouraging people to, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we will be answering them as we go along.
Yeah. Content supply chain, probably best described as a bit of a hot mess right now. There's a whole lot going on. It's not fair to say that it's as a result of any one particular trend. A lot of it is to do with teething troubles as studios are still transitioning from legacy to sort of digital businesses. But an awful lot of this is actually triggered by some artificial things as well. So a lot of sentiment from investors, a lot of sort of predictions around the total applicable market for digital and streaming platforms, which are sort of being viewed a little bit more pessimistically. have effectively caused a complete crash in sentiment for a lot of these organizations. And it comes at a really bad time. It comes at a time when the kind of amazing growth we got off the tail of COVID has ended and everything plateaus a little bit. It comes as there's some very difficult integrations going on with organizations like Warner Discovery. To level that off, there's interplay between things like effectively the continuing digitization of channels, resulting in a complete, I'm going to say destruction, and I'm sure people in the chat will pick me up a little bit, but certainly very damaging trends going on within the traditional TV market in the US. And then teething troubles as well with things like Disney being able to unable to revitalize its parks business, failing at converting new audiences to sort of Star Wars IP, and even Marvel looks like it's failing a little bit. So there's a multitude of little things going on that is causing effectively a massive decline in trust to kind of any big studio that is not Netflix.
I think we've also had the impact of the writers' strike, and that we have to take into consideration in terms of the supply chain for new content. There's a few, the tectonic shifts, as you call them, of the streaming platforms is one thing, and that's creating an impact on windowing. And the idea that you could afford as a studio to have exclusivity to yourself and cut ties with your past cash cows, which are basically your distribution partners, has been revisited by most of the studios, if not all. But beyond that, I think we're moving also to thinking about content supply and new content and new formats for content. I think we've seen a lot of focus on scripted, and now beginning to have a lot of focus on unscripted. I think we're going to see that evolve, particularly as we see, for instance, in FAST, we haven't really started with, FAST has relied a lot to date on legacy content. But we're now going to see a lot of the broadcasters going into FAST. We're going to see first windowing of TV content on FAST. We're going to see, therefore, new formats like reality formats develop on FAST. And so that's going to create a different dynamic in terms of content production as well.
Also,
I mean, there's a really good reason for that. And that is effectively, based on what's going on, finances aren't as rosy as what they were a couple of years ago. So if you look at the kind of models that are behind this and the strategy that's now shifting, it's moving away from gaining high value SVOD subscribers, and it's moving better into better managed finances. So it's cost cutting across the board with cleverer ways of making money, and that relates to everything that I think we have talked about, and we're going to touch on again later in this chat. I think the reason that the studios are looking more intensively or investing time and resources in anything from advertising to wholesale to bundling, and even when we're talking about the scripted TV, the cost of a drama series in the States versus an unscripted or entertainment series is day and night. So a lot of that is completely due to two things. One, a sort of a need to actually sort of shore up some of the finances that are going on here, but perhaps, and this is an opinion of mine for sure, proving to shareholders and investors that in fact the studios can deliver on this digital future. It's not a pipe dream that's driven by SVOD subscription only. It is a nuanced and complex ecosystem that can replicate a lot of the models of the past. I think people talk about pay TV 2.0 as sort of encapsulating a lot of these things, and then you see the replication of those formats. FAST for sure representing the cable channels of the past, CTV advertising being a big part of that as well. And then you've got this multitude of sort of bundled and standalone services that come from the studios as well, representing the classic pay TV, the kind of box office style channels.
And we're going to have a much more complex business model surrounding those, as I refer back to my example of Walmart funding content. So, you know, we're going to see a lot more of
Great
that,
example.
and we're
Yeah.
going to see a lot more branded content starting to happen.
So it kind of feeds into the question we just got, which is there going to be enough advertising budgets to sustain all the new ad tiers being introduced? And I would add to this, especially in Europe.
That's a really good question, because there's a lot of conversation around ad budgets at the moment. There is a general sentiment that they are going to improve in 24, because they certainly were radically cut back in 23. And I think all agencies have been suffering enormously from that. Yes, I would say yes, but that's why I'm such a believer in hybrid business models and adopting new models like content commerce, retail media funding, because I think the traditional ad unit in and of itself, I think media spend will diversify into other areas. It's already diversifying into retail media. So I think there is money, there will be budgets. I think brands are keen because of the first party cookie basically ending. I think brands are very, very keen to get their own first party data and to spend on something where they will have the ability to have a full funnel view of the customer. And that's why I think there's going to be spend in that area. I think, so therefore, yeah, the indicators are that there will be, just not necessarily in the traditional ad spend areas.
So
Yeah,
what
just
we see
I
is
didn't have, oh, sorry, Maria, go on.
yes, what we see is also new players entering in the advertising space, so not necessarily the traditional ones that they were
Exactly
using to do campaigns, the personalization, localization, also the use of AI that we'll discuss later, that will allow to personalize advertising, especially now that third-party cookies is going away. Google announced that they're going to stop the use of third-party cookies. I think we'll see new advertisers, we'll see new campaigns. And also I wanted to highlight that you mentioned about content spend, something very important we didn't touch, sports.
Yes, of course.
And I want to say
Hugely important.
something very, very clever that Netflix is doing, because I think Netflix is very clever in many things, despite everyone says Netflix is done. I think Netflix continues to surprise me. And they have this amazing live sports game, 3rd of March, with the 2 best players in the world, Rafa Nadal, Carlos Alcaraz. And I think it's a very clever idea.
One of whom is Spanish, of course.
It happens to be 2 Spanish players.
What
but
happens?
It is incredible how they manage to put also live sports on the platform without having to go through all these fights for the sports rights. And we all know how crazy those prices are.
And let's step in there and basically call it out. The fact is that content is being created by more than just studios these days. And, you know, with the collapsing of the ecosystem, we are seeing influencers, and you could call Rafael Nadal an influencer, obviously. And with that, the ability to go straight to the public with their own production and their own content. And as the ecosystem collapses in of itself, and becomes hybrid, you're going to see a lot more of that, and you're going to see disintermediation of the traditional studio monopoly on this. This is why they have to get, and this applies to broadcasters as well. This is why they have to get a lot more flexible and a lot more real in how they're commissioning and thinking about content and content production, because there are alternatives, and those alternatives are becoming very lucrative, and they've been there for some time. I mean, you know, we can talk about YouTube. That's the biggest platform on the planet for content. But yeah, you're right. And I think where it's manifesting and playing out, which is really interesting, is in the sports arena.
So I've got another question here from the viewers, listeners. I can only see a fragmented market in Europe for fast AVOD. So many services and each have limited reach, not like the US market at all. Will there be more fast aggregators that can create a scale? Very, very good point. I was having very similar discussion where actually Maria and I were having very similar discussion with actually somebody who deals with the advertising side of fast in Europe, and they pointed out exactly to this. So what do we see? Is there a way of kind of adapt the American model of fast and make it more European, and therefore kind of make it more beneficial for European broadcasters?
But to be honest, in a way, there are more fast channels for the consumer point of view. There are more fast channels in the US than there are in Europe. In the US, there are more than 1,533 fast channels. In the UK, we have 500, so there are 3 times more there.
The monetization opportunity is bigger. So
the opportunity is bigger because they don't have the amazing quality of fantastic public service broadcasters we have here in Europe producing fantastic content and free content for all. So the market, the US is very different from Europe. But I will say that in both, the number of channels is exceeding the capacity of consumers to find those channels. So people are still asking friends and family and flicking through channels to find the content they want to watch. So for me, content discoverability is still critical. Connected TV and hardware companies are trying to make that easier for users, but still our consumer survey we published this week.
And that's where AI can help, to be honest. I think, you know, if you look at NBC, they introduced a little very simple bot that helps you understand what's on that evening on their platform. And, you know, I think that's that sort of thing, you know, search for content, search generally is changing through chat GPT and similar services. And so it's no longer this, you know, this sort of, you don't Google something, you go to chat GPT, you have, they learn your preferences, they can start to build suggestions for you in a different way. So you're right. There is a huge amount of content. I think the opportunity in Europe is quite significant because the opportunity to service communities that haven't been serviced enough is really going to come up in fast, and because of the low cost to entry, provided that the platforms that distribute fast services like the Rokus and others and Samsungs leave it open, there is a really interesting opportunity for local content that super serves local audiences. So if you look at it not from the point of view of sheer numbers, but from the point and ad revenue, but from the point of view of the customer lifetime value or the ARPU on those numbers, if you have something that's a highly specialized service, either through linguistics, geography, interest, or whatever, you have a lot of opportunities to match that with targeted advertising and get very rich and lucrative return on your investment. So it's a slightly different model to the traditional pay TV model where everyone was treated equally. I don't think in a fast universe where you're creating content, you necessarily have to have an American reach to make it a profitable service.
But do we think there will be more aggregators? And I would say most importantly, do we think the big TV budgets are actually going to buy into fast?
Well, aren't we seeing that already in the UK with ITV and others? I mean, you know,
so basically
they will be launching their own services. I mean, even, you know, Kasha, BBC is launching its own fast services. How could you be asking? You're the one that should be telling us this.
We're not platform aggregators.
No,
that I think is the point. Are they going?
Yeah, I mean, that's to be played out. Who will be the aggregators of choice? And what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, in answer to this question is, unlike the US, the aggregators in Europe do not extend to reach everybody. Sky's probably got the highest reach in 3 territories or more, up to 10, I think. But I don't think we've seen the end of it because the likes of, you know, I mean, there are the streaming aggregators will continue to grow, and then yes, I think there is room for growth.
I think to add to that, there's two more things at play here. And one is actually, you know, echoing a comment you made at the start, Natalie, and that's, you know, there's almost a maturation of how in the industry we're thinking about what fast is. It's no longer just a dumping ground for the stuff we found down the back. It's evolving. Yeah, it's evolving. You know, people are spending.
It needs to evolve.
Real names are actually putting strategies in place to get content in the right places with the right people. You mentioned BBC before. At the same time, I think we also need to be very aware that there are actually, you know, there are a small number of aggregators that are taking the lion's share of the viewing. There's a long tail of other stuff going on, and I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is how much that their strategies are actually going to dictate how the sort of fast economic system in Europe especially is going to work. So there are, if you talk to, say, Samsung, for example, they are very clearly shifting to away from the long tail and towards more quality. So there's even
evidence, because they've got all the broadcasters wanting to launch with them, and
exactly, and there's even evidence of them kicking off
content coming from.
At the moment, there's a cutoff point on Samsung. So if you get below a certain number of popularity reviews, they're kicking.
Yeah. But this is a natural evolution on every wave of new technology and aggregation. This is not new. This happened, when Netflix started. It started on archive inventory and library, and it then developed its own original content strategy, and then started windowing, and now it's very much focused on that. This is normal evolution of new platforms and new services.
But you touched there upon ITV, and I do agree. I think that that's basically what we're saying. The trend in Europe will be the existing content aggregators, like broadcasters with BVOD, telcos. They will come up with their sort of unique fast aggregation strategy as a part of this hybrid solution, which will include also SVOD, etc. And that's, in my opinion, at least that's where the European markets will be heading, with, as you say, very healthy dose of local content included there. So the trick for us will be how you develop those new business model as a content owner with BVOD platforms, with telco platforms, to be able to take, share of those revenues generated by them. So it will be really interesting to watch the space. We've also briefly mentioned AI, but obviously this is one of the hottest topic. It's a huge topic. Not really sure where to touch, so many different areas. If each of you could give me like one specific area where you believe AI will be very important this year and why. So again, Natalie.
Well, the obvious one for me is content production. I think it's going to change the way content produced. I know that we've had the writer's strike, and there's been a lot of debate about, the definition of original content and the ability to use traditional talent in different ways. But I think beyond that, the cost of producing content and the lower barrier to entry as a result of AI will change dramatically access to content creation, I should say.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I know you said specific. I spent a lot of time thinking about disruption, which is very vague, and I'm going to apologize for my answer in advance because it's not specific. I keep thinking about the various ways of disruption that has come through media industry to be specific, but you can look at others as well, whether that's a technology or a business model. And I keep thinking that all of these, where the biggest impacts are always felt are where, it's not necessarily on one thing that's really exciting. It's not, an amazing avatar that you can build in AI. It's not necessarily some very sci-fi focused, great new thing that we can invent. I keep thinking that actually what it is the more mundane. So it's the breaking down of barriers that exist in our industry between content creators and the audience. Natalie, again, you picked up on content creators getting more involved with other types of content creation. That kind of area is where I probably see this having the biggest impact. So if you can imagine a future where, in order to create, content of a reasonable quality, certainly of a level that you could broadcast, and that being done with a small team of sort of 3 or 4, and that's editing anything that happens in post, distribution, all the metadata, and then special effects that come with it. You can reduce the cost of that. You can reduce the technical skills needed to it, and you can put effectively, content creators, be they the traditional or the sort of influencers,
yeah,
more directly in front of it. And I think that's probably where we're going to see the huge, the largest disruption of the industry. The fact that AI will break down the barriers in the content creation process and put, effectively.
Can I just add to that? We don't look often enough at what's happening in the publishing industry with the automation of serving of ads. So traditionally, that's also meant that there's been a bit of a disconnect between the creative and the ad trading. And I think that with AI, that's going to become more closely connected. So for TV as well, that will become more closely connected as we automate and we get more programmatic efficiencies. We will also have to look at, as you say, Jonathan, content creation in that.
And Jonathan, I think it was you when you came to the Ondia headquarters in London that you mentioned how important AI will be in dubbing.
Yes, it's already there. It's already there for
Exactly.
film. You can actually redub a film. I was talking to somebody who does it actually, and who did it.
But David, you has been pioneering lots of these techniques,
and it will move the lips, so you don't have this problem of dubbing in a different language.
So I think that is very important. And also, Natalie, talking about advertising, now that we're saying that third-party cookies will go away, AI, generative AI personalization can follow your journey and can even recommend you adverts based on what they know about you. So I think AI and advertising is something as well.
Very connected.
It's a really good point, Marianne. I think one of the most exciting things about that is the ownership of that data. At the moment, you don't own what happens with your cookies. You don't own who's storing your data. In theory, and this could go horribly wrong, in theory, if you have an account which is effectively your AI assistant, the data ownership of what you're doing and what you allow people to understand about you could be owned by a person, which is going to be great for sort of security and freedom.
So on that subject, we actually have two questions. I will read them both for the sake of time, and they both kind of feed exactly that kind of question, feed into the sort of the data. So the first question is fast audience measurement, hybrid GRP, CPM, new currency, how this will create a more strong willingness for the media buyers to exit the current GRP FTA currency, which is a very good point. And then the second one feeding into this, not really a question as much as a reflection. Samsung position is very interesting. Will they be allowed to monetize BBC Studio content or any commercial company content like ITV? How will they share distribution data, share the ads data points? So yeah, very, very kind of interesting sort of question. Is there going to be this new currency, which hopefully then will push the fast advertising, and what data actually are the fast platforms going to share? And partially to answer this, yes, they already monetize BBC and other commercial companies' content, but there is this major question of what data is going to be shared.
And I think that's not a new question. I mean, we have seen it in the SVOD world, and we've seen Netflix recently starting to share more data. I think critically, what I'm predicting is we go back to brands trying to create moments which will allow them to have a full funnel view of the consumer. So either through interactive or transactable content, which enables them to grab the data back to themselves, because the platforms are not necessarily reliable in providing them the full funnel view that they need in order to understand the return on their investments in the ads. So yes, I think transparency of data is a very important issue. How it will develop in the next 12 to 24 months is interesting, particularly with the attrition of third-party cookies and the inability to track outside of the platform. And I think also that we're going to see testing of different types of services and business models in order to be able to build a consistent trading environment on fast for content advertising. Anyone else? Maria?
No, I agree. I think you answered very well, Natalie. So I think Jonathan wanted to add something. Jonathan?
I was going to talk about SVOD data.
SVOD data. Yeah. SVOD data is an interesting point because it's kind of breaking news. We're going to announce it in a couple of days. But for first time, the number of SVODs per home is declining.
Okay. That's globally or in the US?
In the US, in the UK, in all the countries where we do consumer survey, we're doing with Ipsos, in every single country, the number of SVODs per home is declining.
Right.
But total SVOD subscriptions is increasing. and total SVOD revenues is increasing. So what
Now-
it means is maybe people are now having less services per home, but more homes are subscribing to SVOD.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that, and also ask you whether the crackdown on password sharing by Netflix would have had an impact on that.
It did have a bit of an impact, but again, Netflix is still growing despite of stopping that. But I think more than Netflix stopping password sharing is, I think people realize there is so much free content available as well that there's no need to have more than 2-3 SVOD services, because the choice is becoming bigger and the number of free services per home is increasing a lot. And there is, again, because content discoverability is so bad, if you have free services, you don't mind spending time flicking through channels. But if you are paying for SVODs and then you realize after a few months you haven't touched those SVODs, the churn will be high. So we have seen a lot of churn, a lot of reduction in number of SVODs per home. But again, I repeat, doesn't mean that the SVOD world is declining. It's still increasing, both subscriptions and revenues. So is pay TV. So pay TV operators are not dead, telcos are not dead neither, and linear TV is not dead neither. So
It's 2024, we're still talking about pay TV.
and yes, because it's still quite alive, and it's still, in many countries, the revenues from pay TV are higher than the revenues from online services. And pay TV operators, if they are clever, they can aggregate everything, going back to the point of games and going back to podcast, music, everything. So if they play well, again, they can be very relevant going forward, aggregating SVOD, aggregating FAST, AVOD, games, music, everything all in one place.
I think that's a really good point. And I'd also sort of probably highlight at this point, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I don't think we'd be suggesting 10 years we've had SVOD. We'd be suggesting that the SVODs would, be willing to be wholesaled or bundled or aggregated in any kind of way where they're losing the control of effectively the consumer relationship. I think if we're talking about that today, that's not true. It's interesting that SVODs are now at the point where they're struggling to get that last sort of, depending on which market you are, last sort of 10-20% of the applicable audience, and are willing to sit at the table and allow their services to be bundled by telco or pay TV. And I think that's a really interesting point when we're talking about aggregation at the CTV level, content discovery, where those budgets are going and who's paying who. And also
bundling is a natural extension of that, isn't it, Jonathan? I mean, that is one of the trends that we will see, and bundling, but much more sophisticated bundling, because the data really is able to match consumer likes, consumer preferences, consumer economics, whatever actually brings a consumer to the same type of content. So we're going to see much more sophisticated bundles.
Yes,
which will
consolidation, mergers, and let's face it, some companies will just go out of business. We track SVOD players, and we saw already 300-400 less players this month than last year.
On that note, last question we have: do we expect consolidation in the next 12 months?
Yes, inevitably. Look at the economics. Look at the stock prices. Look at who's got the ability to buy. Look at who's got cash and who needs inventory. I think this is the big interesting question for 24. When are we going to see the M&A market move, or a little bit further forward? It's partly, the question is who's got the cash, because at the moment it's expensive to borrow. So, but there's real business incentive to do so, and, structural change. We will see some very fundamental
I bet all the money
shifts
in my pocket that Paramount and potentially Lionsgate won't finish the year as independent.
Yeah, that's right. You're saying that, and others are too. And there's others too. The Discovery Warner Brothers situation hasn't fully played out, and Disney is still trying to overcome some very difficult numbers. Apple has a shortage of inventory. There's all sorts of things playing into it. You've got Microsoft making a big play on a number of fronts. So it's going to be, and they're very advertising focused. So, I think you're going back to the early noughties when you saw some very fundamental restructuring of the distribution chain and acquisitions along that lines. And you've got the gaming companies. Let's not forget that content is not purely the owned by, and content production is not purely owned by TV and US studios. There are other players in the market, and gaming companies have a lot of weight as well.
And I wanted to ask you all a question. Who's planning to buy the latest the Apple Vision Pro headset? I think it's $4,000, but it was another highlight as well. Yeah, we're getting lots of questions about this new headset. How many people do we think will buy it?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean,
right.
I think the problem I've always found with these headsets and the ecosystems is that they promise so much. The stuff that I think they provide is actually really amazing at the moment. Be it for entertainment or even productivity, the virtual environments that you can get off even like a Quest 2 are fantastic. I can pop a Quest on and have all the Excel that I want in the world when I'm doing my stuff.
Yeah.
But yet I still find myself coming back to a screen. And I think fundamentally the problem with these headsets is that they do not provide an increase in convenience or necessarily function. So they're very exciting, but I failed to find the use case yet for what they're actually providing both consumers and professionals. There's some stuff where they're almost there, but at the moment I can't find a convincing product that exists within them that justifies.
I think there's always a challenge when you're creating something that creates a barrier between you and the content experience directly. So, you put on something, you put on glasses, you put on headsets. It has to be an extension of your content experience that's so natural that it's not disrupting it. And that's part of the challenge in those types of situations. So, it's an expensive piece of kit.
So, as exciting as it is, sadly, we have to wrap up this conversation.
Thank you, Kasia. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. And of course, thank you to Maria and Jonathan and Karen.
Thank you, everyone. It was fabulous. And I do think we could have just carried on all afternoon, really. I was just about to grab a glass of wine and just continue listening to you then.
Well, we continue talking with a glass of wine quite happily.
I know,
Quality analysis being improved.
Despite most people being on dry January.
We'll do that next. And thanks, Kasia, for your fabulous moderation as always. So what I'll do, I'll follow up with everybody who's registered and everybody who's attended with all your contact details as well. So in case anybody has any further questions as well.
Thank you.
The recording, again, it will be on the members only section of ctameurope.com. And thanks everybody for joining, and thanks to the panel.
Let's take a photo as well, all of us smiling.
Yeah. Can we take a photo of this?
Thanks everyone for joining.
You as well.
I'll send it around. Thank you. Bye, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Bye.
Here's to 24.